I want to tell you about a trophy that never sat on a shelf. Most players who win one of the most prestigious individual awards in football keep it somewhere visible. A cabinet, a mantelpiece, a spot in the house where guests can see it. That's normal. That's what you'd expect from anyone who just spent an entire season outscoring every other forward on the continent. But in 2011, Cristiano Ronaldo won that exact award, and it never went on display. Not for a week, not for a photo, not for anything. It went straight to auction, and the money it raised didn't go into his pocket or his foundation's general fund. It went toward rebuilding schools in Gaza. Here's what most people don't know about how that actually happened, and why it tells you more about Ronaldo than almost anything he's ever done on a football pitch. This isn't the kind of story that gets a primetime special or a slow-motion replay. It's a paperwork and wire transfer kind of story, the type that requires patience to actually trace from headline to outcome. But once you trace it properly, it tells you something sharper about a person than 90 minutes of highlight footage ever could. Let me paint the picture for you. The 2010-11 season was, statistically, one of the most ferocious scoring seasons of Ronaldo's career. He was at Real Madrid under José Mourinho, and across that La Liga campaign he scored 40 league goals. 40. In a single domestic season. That number was enough to win him the European Golden Shoe, the award given to the top scorer across Europe's top leagues, weighted by league strength. It was his second time winning it, after first claiming it back in 2008 during his Manchester United days. And here's the part that gets lost in the highlight reels. Real Madrid didn't even win the league that year. Barcelona did. Real Madrid also went out in the Champions League semi-finals, beaten by that same Barcelona side. So Ronaldo had individually dominated Europe's scoring charts in a season where his club came up short of the two biggest prizes. That context matters, because it means this wasn't a trophy attached to a triumphant easy season. It was earned in the middle of disappointment, through sheer individual output, goal after goal, week after week. Now here's where it gets interesting. Instead of keeping that golden boot in his trophy room, which by that point already housed Ballon d'Ors, league titles, and Champions League medals, Ronaldo made a decision that a lot of athletes at that level simply don't make. He put it up for auction. Reports at the time pegged the sale at well over €1 million, somewhere in the range of 1 to 1.5 million, depending on which outlet you read and how they converted the currency. And the destination for that money wasn't vague. It wasn't a generic charity fund. The proceeds were directed toward building schools in Gaza, a region that, at that point, had been through years of conflict and infrastructure destruction, where access to functioning schools was a real, immediate need for thousands of children. This wasn't a hypothetical need either. Gaza had been through repeated rounds of conflict in the years leading up to 2011, and reconstruction efforts there were chronically underfunded, with school buildings among the structures most commonly damaged because of how densely populated the territory is. Money raised through high-profile contributions like this one was one of the only realistic paths toward getting classrooms rebuilt at any meaningful pace, which is exactly the kind of practical, unglamorous gap an auctioned trophy ended up filling. Think about what that means. This is a footballer at the absolute peak of individual achievement, holding physical proof of being the best goal scorer in Europe, and choosing to convert that proof into walls, desks, and classrooms for kids on the other side of the world who had nothing to do with football at all. That's not a small gesture. That's a deliberate redirection of personal legacy into something material for people he would likely never meet. Let me break down exactly why this decision carries more weight than it looks like on the surface. First, the timing. Ronaldo didn't wait for a quiet off-season moment or a scripted charity gala to make this move. The trophy was fresh, the ink on the headlines was barely dry. He converted the achievement into action almost immediately, while the football world was still talking about the 40 goals. Second, the choice of cause. Building schools is not a flashy, headline-friendly form of charity the way a hospital wing with your name on it can be. Schools take years to construct, the impact is slow and generational, and there's no quick photo op moment where you cut a ribbon in front of cameras while still wearing your kit. Third, and this is the part that connects to everything else we know about him. This wasn't an isolated incident. It fits a much larger, well-documented pattern. This is where it gets deeply personal, because to understand why Ronaldo keeps making these choices, you have to go back to where he came from. He grew up in Madeira, in a household that struggled financially. His mother worked as a cook and a cleaner. His father worked as a groundskeeper and a part-time kit man for a local football club, and he battled alcoholism for years before passing away when Ronaldo was 20. Ronaldo has spoken about this directly. In a 2013 interview, he said something that really stuck with people who follow his charity work closely. He said his father always taught him that when you help other people, God gives you double back, and that this is exactly what happened to him in his own life. The more he helped people in need, the more he found himself being helped in return. Think about what that means coming from someone who has spent his entire adult life inside the most privileged bubble professional football can offer. He didn't forget where he started. He built his entire philosophy of giving around it. There's a smaller story that gets repeated less often, but it tells you exactly where this instinct really comes from. Ronaldo has talked about being a hungry child in Madeira and being fed by 3 women in his neighborhood who had little themselves but shared what they had with him anyway. Decades later, after becoming one of the wealthiest athletes on the planet, he tracked one of those women down and took her out for dinner, simply to thank her for something she likely never expected to be repaid for. It's not a headline-grabbing donation. It's a private debt he chose to settle on his own terms, long after anyone would have expected him to remember it. But that's not all. The Gaza school's donation wasn't a one-off anomaly in an otherwise ordinary career. 2 years later, in 2013, he auctioned off his Ballon d'Or trophy as well, with the proceeds going toward Make-A-Wish-style causes for children. Around the same period, stories started surfacing of him quietly paying for individual children's medical treatment. A 10-month-old fan named Eric Ortiz Cruz, whose family only asked for a signed shirt to help raise money for a brain surgery, and instead got the entire surgery paid for outright. A 9-year-old named Nuhuzet Guillen, fighting terminal cancer, who Ronaldo dedicated a goal to, invited to watch from his private box, and then funded experimental treatment for more than a year, until the boy passed away. None of these were press conference moments. Most of them were revealed afterward, by the families themselves or by journalists piecing the story together, not by Ronaldo's own publicity machine. The pattern stretches further than just hospital beds and surgeries. In Beirut, a young Real Madrid fan named Haidar, who had lost both parents in a suicide bombing, was invited to meet Ronaldo after a local reporter brought his story to the club's attention, and footage of that meeting, with Haidar in tears as Ronaldo embraced him, traveled well beyond football circles. Around the same period, Ronaldo also became known for avoiding tattoos, specifically so he could keep donating blood regularly, a small, unglamorous habit that says as much about his mindset as any of the bigger donations. By 2017, ESPN had compiled a list of his charitable activity that included funding a children's hospital in Chile, on top of everything already happening across Europe and the Middle East. This habit also reaches back further than most people assume, well before the Gaza donation made headlines. Back in 2004, Ronaldo saw a fan wearing his Portugal number 7 shirt in television coverage of the Indonesian tsunami and sent aid to the relief fund, money that went toward transporting food, tents, blankets, and medical supplies into the affected areas. He returned to Bali nearly a decade later to support a mangrove conservation project tied to that same region's long-term recovery. The same instinct showed up again nearly a decade after the Gaza donation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ronaldo and his longtime agent, Jorge Mendes, donated close to $2 million to hospitals in Portugal, specifically to fund ICU equipment at a moment when intensive care units across the country were being overwhelmed. Daniel Ferro, president of Lisbon's Santa Maria Hospital, later confirmed the gesture publicly, saying that Mendes had reached out after working with Ronaldo to finance ICU supplies for COVID patients, beds, monitors, ventilators, and infusion pumps among them. A few years before that, in 2014, Ronaldo had also donated roughly €1.5 million to a Portuguese cancer center, the same kind of facility that had treated his own mother after her breast cancer diagnosis. Different decade, different crisis, same underlying habit. Turning personal experience into funding for the exact kind of care he'd once needed himself. None of this happened in a vacuum either. In 2015, this accumulated track record earned him a spot on DoSomething.org's Top 20 Athletes Gone Good list, alongside names like Neymar and Maria Sharapova, recognition that came not from one grand gesture, but from years of smaller, repeated decisions stacking up. He's also carried ambassador titles with organizations like Save the Children and UNICEF, lending his name to causes that needed visibility just as badly as they needed funding. Here's exactly how that matters. When you put the Gaza school's donation next to all of this, you stop seeing it as an isolated charitable gesture and start seeing it as one data point in a consistent operating pattern. The trophy wasn't sold because someone advised him it would be good optics. It was sold because, by that point in his life, individual silverware had already become something he was willing to convert into material help, repeatedly across different countries, different causes, and different years. It's the same player who, around that same era, divided a personal Champions League bonus among 3 different organizations, rather than keeping it for himself. The names of the causes changed from year to year. The instinct behind them never did. Let's talk about what an ordinary athlete in that exact position could never have done. They could never have looked at the single most personally validating trophy of a difficult season and treated it as disposable. Most players, understandably, want a tangible symbol of what they achieved sitting somewhere they can see it. They could never have chosen a cause as slow-burning and unglamorous as school construction, when louder, more camera-friendly options were available. They could never have built a years-long track record of doing this quietly enough that journalists had to go digging to find half of it. They could never have tied the decision back to a documented childhood of financial hardship and made the connection explicit, on record, in their own words, rather than letting a publicist write the narrative for them. They could never have extended that same instinct across completely unrelated crises, from a war zone in the Middle East to a single sick child in a Spanish hospital bed, without it ever feeling like a rotation between causes picked for headlines. And they could never have kept doing it, year after year, long after the initial Gaza donation had stopped being news. So, remember that trophy I mentioned at the beginning, the one that never made it to a shelf. It didn't disappear because Ronaldo didn't care about it. It disappeared because he turned it into something more permanent than a trophy could ever be. A trophy gets dusted, photographed, eventually forgotten in a cabinet full of other trophies. A school stays standing. Kids walk through its doors for years, most of them never even knowing why it exists. That decision wasn't really about charity in the abstract sense. It was about a man who scored 40 goals in a single season. In a year his club still came up short, and chose to make sure that statistic outlived the headlines by becoming bricks instead of glass. So there you have it. The real reason that Golden Boot never sat on a shelf is the same reason a kid in Gaza had a classroom to walk into. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.